Last minute, but we're going to put this out there for you. Bender is doing a presentation on the Manasoo up in Georgian Bay. I will be sharing that with you. If you guys want to dive this, check it out with Fully Tech Charters. And for some of you guys, maybe filmmakers, this may be the closest you're going to ever get to it. So enjoy Bender's presentation here.
This story, and it has a hometown twist that I learned about quite a ways into my adventures with this shipwreck. So again, we're going to dive into it. So this is the Manasoo weeks before or months before the accident, but the early days. The Manasoo was built in 1888 as the Macassa by the William and Hamilton Shipbuilding Companies of Port Glasgow, Scotland. She was 155 feet long with a 24-foot beam, so not really any wider than this room, but 155 feet long. She was a steel hull with a wooden superstructure, and it operated as a passenger-carrying ship, moving freight and passengers between Toronto and Hamilton from 1889 to 1927. And I would wager on a Tuesday morning, you could probably get from Hamilton to Toronto faster by this than you could by car today. I'm just guessing. This is what the Macassa looked like during its heyday and running between Hamilton and Toronto and back. Another photo of the Macassa. We believe this is Port Dalhousie Harbor. I'm not 100% sure. Things have changed a little bit since then. And then they were modified, and just about every boat goes through different owners, and it goes through a series of lives and refits and reuses. And inevitably people get, for making money with a 155-foot long boat, we can make even more money with a 178-foot long boat. So in 1905, her hull was lengthened at Collingwood Shipbuilding to 178 feet. Her beam stayed the same. This we'll talk about a little more. After the modifications, she had a tendency to roll in rough seas. So she would sort of sway back and forth, but it wasn't considered unsafe. It is rumored that barrels of sand were placed in the lower hold that would be used to move around the ship to trim the vessel. So this ship didn't have ballast tanks. Again, she was a ship, but almost a boat, if that makes any sense. So there's certainly some private yachts that go up and down the St. Clair bigger than this. In the fall of 1927, she was acquired by the Owen Sound Transportation Company, renamed the Manasoo, and put on a Manitoulin to Sault Ste. Marie route. So this is the same Owen Sound Transportation Company that operates Pelee Island Ferry, the Chichimon. Been in business a long time. They don't talk about the Manasoo much anymore. But Manasoo is spring 1928, so we kind of started with this photo. This is as she looked after her refit in 1905, her full length. You can see just above her waterline, there's a series of portholes and two big gangway doors here. And that will be used for offloading cargo. And then you had a row of staterooms across the top, and then a row of crew rooms above that. You can see 4 lifeboats on her aft deck and a beautiful promenade deck for sightseeing. She certainly was a breathtaking ship in her day. One of the really neat things about European-built ships, even today, if you build a ship in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, or you build a ship in China, you compare it to a boat built in Europe, and the fit and finish, the craftsmanship, the technique, just the way they finish around a door or the bracketry they use, you can spot a European-built boat today the same as you can spot a European-built boat from 100 years ago or 150 years ago. So 1928 was a profitable season for passenger service between Manitoulin and the Soo. Another thing going on in the economy, this is 1928. We're near the end of the roaring 20s, but beef prices were at an all-time high. The Manasoo was converted to haul cattle in September with the intention of returning it to passenger service in the following spring. And I can just imagine how much fun that would have been to clean that boat up after hauling cattle. So the final voyage. On September 14th, 1928, 116 cattle, 19 crew, 2 passengers, Donald Walsh and George Lambert of Oil Springs, Ontario. There's our hometown connection. And a 1928 Chevy Coupe were loaded at Manitowoc, Ontario. The vessel was underway and headed south to Owen Sound by about noon. Note the 1927 Chevy Coupe, quite a stunning vehicle. Conditions, no radar, no weather network, no Coast Guard weather channel. Basically, every skipper was responsible for the meteorology and the planning of their vessel. Certainly, they might have been getting some telegraph information from up or downwind, but it was all a lot of guesswork, and they were all under a great deal of pressure to maintain schedules and try to be profitable. So by late afternoon, the Manasoo was clear of the North Channel and making time. The wind picked up to a moderate 25 knots. Around 2 a.m., the Manasoo started listing to port and taking on water by the stern. So we ask, and this is a rumor, or maybe not a rumor, but speculation, because there really isn't a lot of accurate data about the accident. But it's very likely that the unsecured cargo, the cattle, if anybody's ever worked with cows, you know that they're pretty lazy. And if there's a hill, they're going to go down, they're going to go to the bottom of it rather than walk up it. So it's believed that the cattle, as the vessel listed, would just walk their way over to the low side of the boat. As she started to take on water by the stern, they just worked their way further to the stern, which is the exact opposite of what you would need them to do to try to correct the pitch of the vessel. It's also speculated that the majority of the portholes would have been open. I, again, could just imagine what 116 cattle in a room twice the size of this would have smelled like on a September day. Just speculating. So this is a picture of their route. By about 2 a.m., by 2 a.m., they cleared Cape Croker, and they were just about to make the turn at Griffith Island. So they're 3/4 of the way through their voyage, but this is when trouble started to get them. One thing I can attest to is that if you get a east wind or a northeast wind, this is an absolutely vicious place to be. I think Richard Kelch could attest to that too. You haven't been as wet as you will be on the bow of a boat in a north blow in this spot. So then things got really interesting really fast. Once water overwhelmed the pumps and poured in through the open hatches and portholes, she was doomed. Only one lifeboat was launched, but later capsized. One life raft broke loose during the chaos. All but 6 people went down with the ship in less than 5 minutes. 6 men on a raft. And this whole story takes 5 hours to tell. So I really wanted to focus on our contribution, or my contribution to this story. So we're kind of glossing over some very relevant parts of the story. And I don't mean that in any disrespect. It's just I've got an hour to tell the story. So Captain McKay, First Mate Long, Chief Engineer Thomas McCutcheon, Purser Arthur Mitterborough, Oiler Roy Fox, and Don Walls were able to climb aboard the raft. The wind swirled and pushed that raft as close to a half a mile from the safety of Griffith Island and then out to the center of Georgian Bay. This went on for 60 hours. Chief Engineer McCutcheon died before dawn. They were later picked up by the Manitoba, which was one of their sister ships that had gone out to look for her. Then pretty much everything just went back to normal. It was front page news in just about every newspaper in Ontario for a week or two. And then they just sort of faded into obscurity. There was a investigation. There was some efforts made to look for the wreck, all in vain for 90 years. July 1st, 2018, Ken Merriman, Jerry Eliason, and both from outside of Duluth, Minnesota, and Canadian shipwreck explorer and historian Chris Cole discovered the wreck exactly where the newspaper said it would be, east of Griffith Island. And on July 2nd, I got probably the best phone call ever. And that phone call went something like this. So my wife and I run a dive charter business. At the time, we only had one boat, and we spend the month of June in Eastern Lake, Ontario, running divers at shipwrecks. So I had just gotten the boat home the day before. I'm cleaning stuff up. I'm out in the garage filling tanks and just doing chores. I've got an 11-month-old baby girl and a wife that's been basically dealing with an 11-month-old baby girl for the last 30 days. And my phone rings. and it's Ken Merriman. And we had spoken maybe twice before. I wouldn't say we were friends. I wouldn't say we were enemies. We knew of each other. It's about as far as we could go with it. And the conversation went something like this. Greg, I've called everybody I know of that can do these dives. We were expecting to find this wreck in far deeper water, and we weren't expecting to be able to dive it. I have a 2-day window to get out and dive it and document it before I have to start steaming across the lake to Alpena, Michigan for another commitment that he has. So if you can come down, that'd be great. If you can't, I understand. He said, I called everybody else. So I'm like, wow, I feel really special that I'm the last guy who called, and I can maybe understand why. He says, well, Ken, I don't know, I just got back from Eastern Lake, Ontario, 11-month-old daughter, right? I don't know. Let me ask the wife. So I just kind of poked my head in. I got the phone here. Poke my head in the house. Hey, hon, I got Ken Merriman on the phone. She's like, sure, what? Well, he's got some shipwrecks he wants to have a look at it up in Georgian Bay. Do you think I could maybe just kind of run up there this weekend and poke around a little bit? Well, you do whatever you want. Okay, Ken, we'll see you Friday night. So I loaded up my truck, and Friday night I drove up and met them at Lion's Head. And early the next morning, we were on our way to the wreck site of the Manasoo. So the dives, we had a 2-day weather window. The weather was phenomenal those 2 days. Water temperatures in early July are about 36 on the bottom, or 2 degrees Celsius. And above 50, so from 50 feet and up, you would have water temps in the mid 40s is about all you get. We're hoping, because it's been kind of a warm winter, we might do a little better than that this year. Depth of the wreck is a maximum depth of about 210 feet. Visibility in this part of the lake has been phenomenal as well, about 200 feet. So this had its challenges, but it also had its benefits. The first divers on day one was myself and Ken Merriman. And on day two, my buddy Terry drove basically through the night back from Milwaukee when he caught wind of what was going on, and met us up in Lion's Head to do another day of diving. So I don't know if I expressed this clearly enough. These phone calls don't happen. There are people that dive for 50 years and never get the opportunity to be one of the first on a shipwreck. And it was just a total honor to get to do that. And I don't expect I'll get that phone call again, but it's like hitting the lottery as a diver. So what did we find? Well, so the objective, we were under an archaeological permit, so we're not permitted to go inside the wreck for that season. The equipment we had with us was basically documentation style photography gear. So certainly capable of doing the work underwater, but not as cutting edge as some of the professional photographers are using. But again, given that we're going to be the first people on it, let's take the stuff that we know works. Let's not try to get fancy, and let's just get the best we can. So this was Sunday, diving on the Manasoo. I don't think this was too bad. That actual camera there took this shot. This was on the front page of just about every newspaper in the country. We've got Ken Merriman on the right, and that's myself on the left. This is the wheelhouse in the Manasoo. We're in about 177 feet of water. Second most intact wheelhouse in the Great Lakes, as far as I know. And then we found this, and this comes back to the hometown connection. We spent a lot of time afterwards. This hooked me. I'm a mechanic by trade, I'm a car guy. This drew me in. I'm like, I could just stay here all day and take pictures of this thing. We didn't know a lot about it, other than we obviously knew it was on the wreck. We knew it was a Chevy because it has the blue porcelain paint logo on it, and we knew it was 1928 or older because we knew when the wreck went down, but we really didn't know much more about that. I spent 6 months, spoke with every antique car collector and car club that we could find. There was finally a fella in Atlanta that specializes in restoring these things. We sent him this photo, and as soon as he looked at the photo, he said, that's a 1927 Chevy Cabriolet coupe. And without a doubt, what's really interesting about this is 27, the Chevy cars got an aluminum radiator shroud, cast aluminum, and the truck's got a steel one. And that is an aluminum radiator shroud. And there's a little point kind of in the center. It was a 1-year only rad shroud. Think about aluminum in 1927 as carbon fiber of the day. You know, they were just starting to play with aluminum on airplanes, and here it was on a car. So that was, we were able to do a definitive dating of the car. So it was a 1-year old car when it went to the bottom. And this is something really, really special too, is this is a Ontario license plate. And we did get some video of it, and the video was able to show the tag, the actual date, which was a 1927 tag. This was a time when you would get a new plate every year. You know, we used to have to redo stickers until last year. They would do, actually, I learned a lot about classic cars and about license plates and stuff. Then you'd get a new plate every year until the Second World War, when they were rationing materials. They went to a paper sticker. And then after the war, they went back to plates until the late 70s, when they went to a sticker thing. Funny how new ideas are old and old ideas are new again. So this was the dive team. This was the best that they could come up with. When you want the best, but this is the best you can find, is myself, Terry Irvine, Ken Merriman, and Jerry Eliason were topside. Again, 2 great days of diving. We had to keep this one under our hats for a little while. Certainly we couldn't talk much about it. There might have been the odd whisper after a couple beers, but we really kept this one quiet. One of the things that when a team discovers a shipwreck, it's kind of their privilege is when they want to announce it. So they filed a report with the Ministry of Culture and Tourism, and then made their official announcement in November of 2018. It was supposed to be, I was told it was going to be in September. It was going to be September 14th of 2018. And there was a little snafu. Things happened, and maybe some stuff got leaked. But anyways, that was the team that found it, minus Chris Cole, who was busy writing another book. So a year goes by, and we're pacing, and we got to get back there. We just 2 dives, a little bit of video, a little bit of photography. It's just we're finally allowed to tell our dive buddies and all our friends about how great this is, and they're like, yeah, I'm sure it's all that, sure it is. So 2019 comes around, and we started planning this within days of the official announcement. We put together a crew of who we believe are the best underwater photographers in the world. And this is right before COVID too. We sort of snuck this one in. And we planned 2 weeks to go and document the shipwreck. This time we weren't operating under an archaeological license. And there's a difference. When you're doing archaeology, there's a lot of rules. When you're doing recreation, there basically are no rules other than your recreation cannot be archaeology. So there was a set of rules that we sort of had to follow, but we had a little bit more latitude, I guess you could say. So Manasoo Expedition 2019, for over a year, we planned to look forward to a second chance. Said we actually got the best this time, not just the B team. 2 weeks were planned for the best underwater photographers in the world. The Explorers Club. I don't know if any of you guys have ever heard of that. Their flags have been on just about every exploration, significant exploration project going back over 100 years. Neil Armstrong had an Explorers Club flag in his pocket when he walked on the moon. Our Explorers Club flag hadn't been to the moon, but it had been some other pretty cool places. So they had issued us a flag to carry during this project. We thought that was quite an honor. The objective was to capture some high quality photo and videos of the as found condition of the wreck. One thing that we'll get into later is shipwrecks are a perishable item, and the more people dive them, and just as time goes on, they break down and they disappear. So we wanted to capture it in that snapshot in time as it was discovered, as close to as it was discovered. We wanted to look for evidence of the failed cattle pens, and we wanted to look for some remains of these alleged ballast barrels that they'd used. So this is one of the week's teams. We had a lot of photographers, and then we had people that were there for logistics. We had to get the mooring on the shipwreck. We had to assist the photographers. We had to do lighting. There was a lot of other things going on to make the photographers look good. They don't just show up with a really good camera and take amazing photos. And there's Dave Ferguson, Matt Tupps holding the Explorers Club flag. So this is a shot. We're just going to kind of run through some pictures here. So this is a shot inside this is looking down from the staterooms into the engine room. And remember I talked about European built vessels, and you can just see this scroll work, right? Nobody building a workboat in North America is going to take the time to hand turn all of those ballasters or do the woodwork quite like that. And it's quite amazing that 91 years on the bottom of Lake Huron, it still looks like that. We're just getting started. Here's one of the unused lifeboats. The oars are still locked in place. There's still water jug inside. Like it's as if you could just get the water out of it, it would sit and float on the surface. This is the upper deck above the staircase, looking aft. You can see some of the paint still in place. There's artifacts just everywhere. This is, again, a snapshot in time. And then this photo will never be taken again. But this is, we call it the grand staircase. So this is at the top of those stairs. That is the bottom of those stairs looking down. And certainly the team did an excellent job. You can see we have a photographer. You think the logistics of what's going on. You have a photographer here in a room full of the finest talcum powder silt. You can still even see some of the details on the rug here. Out on the left, you've got a diver lighting up through the gangway, and you've got a diver overhead lighting up, and none of them percolating silt down. And when divers go inside to get a photo like this, they better be speedy because it isn't long before the visibility starts to suffer. Photos looking forward. So this is the wheelhouse. And we've got a couple other shots of this. There's just a few photos that elude us, and one is a photo of the clock. We've got a couple photos of it, but not the one we're trying for just yet. So but you can see great big manual ship's wheel, and you can see the clock up here in the corner. This is in the engine room looking aft. Again, we're just sort of scratching the surface at exploring the engine room. And this one's peculiar. This is looking aft from the bow. Again, very narrow. There's a salon in here, so this would have been where meals were served, perhaps drinks. And then we've got our stairway going up to the crew quarters and the pilot house. Now, maybe somebody else could help us with this. We have theories on this, but do you notice how the left railing has absolutely no marine life growth on it? Well, the right railing has, 6 inches built up around it. And if you even look down here, right where your hand coming down would come off the railing, we're starting to see that marine life. So we have a few theories on that. What you guys think about that for a little bit as to why or how that could happen in over 91 years. Again, this is just showing off now. You get the lighting crew up and they get creative, and it's amazing what these folks can do in 20 to 30 minutes of bottom time, and some really good equipment, skilled divers. Another great shot of the 1927 Chevy Coupe. And this one doesn't do it justice. It didn't turn out like they were looking for, but she sunk by the stern and literally embedded into the seafloor. And the seafloor is holding her bow off the bottom by 15 or 20 feet. And you can actually swim underneath it. I don't necessarily advise because someday it's going to come down, and I don't want to be there when it happens. But this would be the deepest part of the wreck. So this is a photo of Terry Irvine setting some lights in place, and he would be in about 208 feet of water in this location. Another shot of the wheel. The steering wheel is probably the prettiest steering wheel and the most perfect intact steering wheel in the Great Lakes, certainly that I've seen. Just great, big, massive thing. Its diameter would be nearly the same size as the projector screen. And there's another one. I think we've seen something like this before. You can see just how proud that is off the bottom. What's interesting is when Ken and Jerry and Chris found the wreck, they used a side scan sonar, and the images you get with that can be kind of like trying to look at ultrasound photos. You know, like look at my baby girl and my baby boy, and I just see a bunch of blurbs. But in their side scan image, it looked as though the bow were lifted off the bottom. There was this clear gap. So we were quite excited when we got down on the wreck, and it's really off the bottom. It's really, really there. So again, someday that's going to come down. But this bicycle we figure belonged to Arthur Mitterborough. He was the purser, and he bought this bicycle to ride around on Manitoulin Island while they're awaiting loading passengers. If you've ever been to Manitoulin Island, it's kind of a neat spot to ride around on a bicycle. So draft markings or some sort of, we're not really sure. They wouldn't be draft markings. They're too high on the lifeboat, whether they were inspection markers or something like that. We'd love to know more about this. And every time we dive this, we usually get one question answered, and we come back with 5 or 6 new questions that need research. There's another Jeff Lindsay shot. That's Becky Kagan lighting everything up and getting a shot. And I don't know who this guy is or how he made it into my presentation, but he's exploring the break. So about 3/4 of the way back, the ship starts to fall apart right where she meets the seafloor. And we figure just by we don't have great images of it, but by inspecting it, we figure this is where the expansion had been, where the boat had been cut and the additional 40 some odd feet added. We suspect that's where it is. And it's been a great opportunity, a great spot for us to get in and weasel around to see what kind of trouble we can get into, what kind of things we can find inside. Get in the car. You just got to keep coming back to this car. And I'll tell you the story on this. So I'm on cloud 9. I've had the best dive season of my life. And I get home and I'm just consumed by the story of this wreck. And I get reading, and I go to the archives in Wyoming, Ontario. We start digging up newspaper articles, and through those newspaper articles, we're actually able to correct some of the record. And it's known that the cattle ranchers that purchased the cattle, the 2 passengers, came up here in this car. But it's just neat to see a car 1927, made in 1927. Purchased from a local dealership, likely in Oil Springs, on the bottom of Lake Huron. And I think it's a privilege and just serendipitous that myself, living in Alvinston, Ontario, 15 minutes from Oil Springs, was the first human to lay eyes on a car that basically drove around my stomping grounds. So I just think that you can't make this up. You can't write these kind of stories. So this is the top of the 3-cylinder and steam engine. Again, in the engine room, it's a little snug in there, and I need to spend an entire dive just poking around the engine room. But it's so hard to dive this wreck and not be like a dog chasing a squirrel, because there's just everywhere you look, there's something new. And another shot of one of the lifeboats, and this really illustrates it really well, where you can see her superstructure is very intact, and then the last, say, 60 foot of the vessel, she's just broken. Her back is just broken and embedded into the sand and collapsed. There's a lifeboat up on top. There's a davit still, and on top of her, we don't have a good photo of it today, but on top of the 3rd lifeboat that didn't get off is her stack has actually come down, crushing that lifeboat. This is a pressure gauge in the boiler room, or in the engine room. And again, how I talk about that craftsmanship, the brass work is just spectacular, and even the font, it's just decadent. And there was pride of workmanship that went into building this boat. And then this is my photo. I am convinced, I don't know if anybody else is, but these are steel drums that have been crushed by the weight of about 190 feet of Lake Huron. Why would they have had steel drums on board this vessel? Well, the story says that they used those full of sand or water to correct a list. This is a chandelier hanging in the main salon. It's a pretty tricky spot to get into. Again, comes back to the decadence and the pride of workmanship that went into this boat. Another set of gauges. Again, just the workmanship, right? You could have just come down and done a 90 and back out, but you know, someone took their time and took pride in what they were doing in the engine room. Nobody goes in the engine room except for the guys that are all covered in coal dust and oil. And there's another shot of that. And this was really cool. Richard Kelch got this photo this summer. So I've kind of dumped a couple of the 2019 photos. We've got some new stuff that we're showing off too. And for the last few years, something has been covering this builder's plate. And just through the decay of time, we can actually see this wreck change from one week to another, believe it or not. What was blocking that has fallen to the floor and revealed this beautiful builder's plate. This is made out of bronze, so it's toxic to marine life. When they make anti-fouling paints, they use brass, bronze, or copper to prevent marine life from growing on it. So this very likely, in 1,000 years, when the Manasoo is decayed into just a pile of rust, this will be her headstone. And it really is kind of a neat thing. We knew it was the Manasoo, it was where the Manasoo sank. Dimensions are the same. It's got the car on it, but this definitively, that would not look good on your mantle, Rich.
No, and I said what made me notice it the first time was I was following no work.
Right.
I was just looking around no work, and I went, yeah, it's there. Like I didn't even see it. I was so focused on no work.
Sure. So, but this is something very special, and I don't know that I've seen a builder's plate on any other shipwreck. I've seen an engine builder's plate, but not the actual builder's plate. So, and then this is something, I don't know whether it's special or controversial or what, but I felt the need to share it tonight is Cal Cawthorne is an absolute artist. He's done some paintings and some drawings of some shipwrecks that are really hard to capture on either video or in photo. This wreck is in such phenomenal conditions and with such great visibility that we can shoot the wreck nearly in its entirety. So that isn't really necessary here, but Cal's he'll take 100 photos of a shipwreck and compile them into a painting that you swear is a photograph. But he took a little bit of liberty here and placed some period correct ghosts into the images that he's taken, and I think they kind of bring it home. So again, this is one of Cal's shots looking aft. His style is a lot. It's a little bit lower technology and it's a lot darker, but I think it's a lot more pure. He does no post work. Most photographers will spend a great deal of time color correcting and working on stuff. The only thing Cal did with this was placed in those ghosts. He did not do any work on the actual print. And then again, here we've got Don Wallace, cattleman from Oil Springs, waiting for them to unload his 27 Chev. There's our captain outside of his wheelhouse. And a couple unlucky passengers sitting on the lifeboat. You can see actually here, there's one of the unused lifeboats. And right back here, there's our stack that's fallen over, and you can see the second lifeboat that's been crushed by the stack. And that's about it for my presentation. I want to say special thanks to Jeff Lindsay. There's a link to his photography page because he's one of these high-paid fancy photographers with all the expensive camera gear. Terry Irvine, Richard Kelch, Becky Schott, Cal Cawthorne, Steve Warmer, Ken Merriman, and Jerry Eliason. And then here's another shot of the second week crew with the rebreathers lined up and some real fancy camera gear, the Explorers Club flag. And this is at Big Bay, Ontario. So right where Pole Points Bay dumps into Georgian Bay. We had gorgeous conditions, cold water, but gorgeous conditions. And we brought the best, and I think we got our money's worth. So, if you guys enjoyed this presentation, we'll do some Q&A and stuff. If you guys enjoyed this presentation, I strongly recommend you guys look into this. Great Lakes Shipwreck Festival is going to be held in Livonia, Michigan this Saturday. It proves to be a pretty good time. There's stories like this told by far better presenters than myself. It runs all day. I think it starts at 9 and runs till 5. And it is the kind of the last really, really good shipwreck show. And it's centered around shipwrecks. There's a lot of divers are going to be there, of course, but it's people telling the stories of their discoveries and exploration. So there's a link to it, and then there's the actual schedule. So I know I get the shameless plug in. So 9 a.m. Rick Mixer's going to go on. He just tells all kinds of cool stories. We got Mike, 100 Years of Shipwrecks, Eric Pavelak. This guy is probably the authority on U-boats, World War I, World War II U-boats in along the North American coastline. He knows the story. He's got files and written books on just about every one of them. Jeff Thomas, Lost Visitors of the Great Lakes. Then we're gonna have a great lunch. Usually, because it's at the same venue as where most of the people are staying, usually the caps come off after lunch. Terry Irvine is going to be presenting the story of the SS Manasoo, probably doing a better job of it than me. Kevin Aries is going to be telling some shipwreck stories, shipwreck that saved the city. Dusty Cliffman, no one's going to go to that one. Kevin McGee, Steel and Stone, that's where we're going. Scapa Flow. Brenda Ballard, Ghosts in the Oceans of the, man, I could have got a better, Michigan's Underwater Graveyard. And James Mott's a really cool guy. He's the pretty guy of the Great Lakes, so he's going to be talking about looking good on shipwrecks. So great show to go to. Livonia, Michigan's 2 hours from here if you got a good border crossing. Certainly worth the time. I think tickets are like $30 or $40. They might have a sale on, I think, tomorrow night. And that's pretty much all I've got on the presentation. We want to have some questions and answers or anything else, certainly fire away. So.
Do you know why they built it in Scotland and then sailed it across the Atlantic?
At the time, there are very few shipyards in the area that could build in steel. So it was not that uncommon. It wasn't until the 1900s, really, that the early 1900s, that the Collingwood and Georgian Bay came online building in steel.
We can speak to that a little bit. When they built the Monarch in Sarnia in 1890, James Beattie complained very loudly that he had to go overseas to get ships, and he couldn't get them to the dimensions of the American ships. So he couldn't use a Detroit architect named Frank Kirby. The Americans were building all sorts of steel ships. They had to build in the Empire. So they had to go to Scotland, or eventually in Hamilton, where they owned this, the Henry family started building. But it was just very unprofitable in Canada. They couldn't compete with using British steel and British engines and everything else. So it was like they just smoked us in the economy back then too.
I couldn't imagine taking a 155-foot long ship across the ocean.
There's terror stories. This one was a good one. There's terror stories of them loading the whole passenger deck up with coal. And then they get in a storm, they're in ice, everything else. They have to sleep up somewhere above the boiler because they're getting flooded out. And they start running out of coal. So by the time they get in the Sydney, Cape Breton to get coal, they are burning furniture, they're ripping out woodwork, trying to get anything for fuel.
A brand new boat. Yeah.
Brand new boat, and they get there and go, wow, we got a scrap boat. And it's like so much for your workmanship.
Yeah. Those nice, beautiful railings.
There's horror stories about that, though, because they want to get these over as early as they can to make money the first season. And then the problem is you're in ice. You're in Cape Race, you're in ice. You get into spring storms, you have no radio. And by the time you get here, ships were lost. They just didn't know where they were. Big problem.
Thank you for that. So.
Oh, sorry.
One thing I didn't touch on was we call this is a closed circuit rebreather. This is the technology that certainly changed technical diving for me and for most people diving the Great Lakes now. and we occasionally refer to them as our time machine because we put this on and we're 200 feet from 90 years ago, 91 years ago. So that's the cost of admission. People always ask about recovering artifacts, and some people that have pushed to try to recover this car off of Manasoo. And I always say, you want to go see that car, the cost of admission, she's a steep one, but that is a museum. This museum is underfunded. Museums in London are underfunded. The museums in Michigan are underfunded. Most museums have storage lockers that they can't afford to pay the rent on, full of stuff that they love to put on display, but they don't have the square footage, the staff, or the patrons to come in and even see the stuff. So as soon as we disturb it, we take it away, that snapshot in history is gone. As to the car, as beautiful as it looks, it's a complete and total write-off. And I can get into that a little bit and just how these cars were built. Again, my research sent me down quite a rabbit hole. So this would have been a Fisher body, likely built in Amherstburg, Windsor area. It would have been basswood framed. So you have a steel frame with a basswood basically furniture work, and then the steel skin sort of more or less stapled and nailed to it is how these were built. So although this metal looks very intact, as soon as you start to handle it, it's just going to crumble. The basswood is going to be a sponge, and as soon as it sees any oxygen, it's going to rot. You would spend $1 million on a saturation diving team to get this thing out of the wreck and back to the light of day. Then you would spend $1 million trying to restore it. You can buy that car that I had earlier in my presentation. In fact, that car itself, going back, that car is for sale. You can buy it today for $34,000 US, and it's in a lot better shape. You can drive it. So there were over 100,000 of those cars built. There's probably 1,000 still in existence. So it's not like it's a one of a kind. There's no value to recovering it. Unless you want to sink $2 million into a
$34,000 car.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow.
Why did they dive it on an arche? Like, why didn't they just dive it?
So Ken and Jerry are Americans. They, as part of their retirement plan, they've taken their 1948 Owens. That's the boat there called the Hay Boy. It's been a working boat. It's worked the Great Lakes since 1948. And they are circumnavigating the Great Lakes. They've been doing this for about 6 years now. This was their second year. And they go and hunt for shipwrecks. Now, if you're going to go look for shipwrecks in Ontario waters, you're supposed to do it with an archaeological permit. Now, as an Ontario resident taxpayer, I go, what are you going to do to me if I go look for shipwrecks? What are you really going to do to me? If you're an American and you're in Ontario waters, or Canadian waters, you're doing something you're not supposed to. The very first thing they're going to do is say, go home right now, or we're going to chain the boat to the dock and figure we can get you in front of a judge sometime in November. So for Americans to search for shipwrecks in Canadian waters, they do everything exactly by the book. When this wreck was discovered, there was some snarling and some snotty comments from people within the dive community about how these Americans, they come over and they just find these wrecks and they have no right. And I challenge anybody that's going to say that, well, there, look for it. There was in 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022, there was zero exploration on the Canadian side of the Great Lakes for shipwrecks by Canadians. Zero. Not a single person towed a side scan for a single afternoon. So until they're out there mowing the lawn, putting in the time, burning the fuel, and doing the research, then they can shut up. So.
And then what's their due diligence from a, like because they have the permit,
Right.
what do they have, are they bound to take pictures? Like,
So they have to file a report regardless of what they find, right? So if their report is we searched for so many days, we didn't find anything, that's their report. If they find something, they would be expected to share the location and share any and all documentation of it. Per their permit, they are not permitted to enter the plane of the wreck. So you're not allowed to put your camera inside a window and pan it. You're not allowed to swim inside the wreck. You're not allowed to excavate anything in the wreck. You're technically not supposed to touch it. It's pretty hard to dive a wreck, no matter how smooth you are, without having some impact. And that's something I recognize every time we dive these wrecks. We are leaving our fingerprints on it. We are adding to the decay of it. So we try to really work hard to minimize that, but it's sort of, it's the elephant in the room that we try not to talk about, but we have to acknowledge that. So per their permit, you know, I was given the lecture, don't touch